Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're jumping into some source material that I think really flips a long-standing academic argument on its head.
It absolutely does.
We're looking at the work shared by Jaime Hoerricks, and it's all about Gestalt language processing, GLP.
Right. And for anyone who needs a quick reminder, GLP is basically this other natural pathway for learning language.
Exactly. Instead of a child learning word by word, mom, ball, go.
The analytic model, yeah.
Right. A Gestalt processor starts with these big, meaningful chunks, whole phrases, scripts from movies, things like that. Hoerricks calls them Gestalts.
And only later do they start to break those down into individual words and grammar. It's a totally different process.
But here's where it gets so interesting. The sources you shared with us, they're not asking us to debate the linguistics of it.
Not at all.
Instead, they're demanding we look at why this way of making meaning gets so dismissed by institutions. It's less about speech mechanics and, well, it's more about power. Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission here is to really explore this idea that saying GLP isn't real isn't just an intellectual disagreement.
No, the argument is that it's a social harm.
A social harm, and we're going to trace how that refusal to recognize someone's way of communicating translates into these quiet, very real, and painful consequences.
And that reframing, for me, that was the big aha moment in these sources. The second, an institution, and we're talking about universities, school districts, clinical bodies.
The big players.
The big players. The second they deny the legitimacy of how someone makes meaning, the harm stops being theoretical. It's not in a journal anymore.
It's in the home. It's in the classroom.
Exactly. It's in their daily life. And what's fascinating here is how the source material just flips that central tension, the public conversation. It pretends to be about proof.
Right. Citations and data models.
Yes. But Hoerricks is arguing that the actual consequence of that denial is ethical. It's neglect. It's essentially saying to a person, the way you experience reality is not real.
Wow. And the source starts by describing what it calls the conversation inside the closed room.
I love that framing.
It's the academic bubble, right?
Yeah.
The one that, as you said, pretends to be about theory. It's safe in there.
Very safe.
And the questions they ask in that room are things like, is GLP real?
Has it been sufficiently proven?
Does it meet our standards of legitimacy? It forces the whole thing into this sort of intellectual cage match. My model versus your model, my citations versus yours. It feels very distant.
It's a buffer. It's a protective buffer. Because as long as the conversation is locked in that closed room, the academy never has to face the immediate ethical duty they have to the people who are right now communicating this way.
It's a brilliant stall tactic.
It is. But the author wants us to step outside that room, to ask the question that actually matters to a parent or a teacher.
And that question isn't about data.
No, it's about duty. What does it mean to teach, to support, and maybe most importantly, to respond to real distress? When the dominant institutions insist that the way you make sense of the world simply does not exist.
That shift is just seismic, isn't it? From is it true to what is our duty?
Completely.
It yanks the whole debate out of abstraction and puts it right on the front lines. I mean, if a major institution says a child's communication is just noise, they are effectively denying that child's right to be supported properly. And this brings us to the language the source uses, which is, it's very strong. The dismissal of GLP is called misrecognition, and that misrecognition spirals into what Hoerricks calls quiet ethical violence.
It's very intentional language. It's meant to jolt you out of thinking this is just some, bureaucratic oversight.
So what does misrecognition mean in this context?
It means that the person's communication is seen, but it's institutionally labeled as something else, as something it's not.
Like just echolalia or non-functional behavior.
Exactly. And that mislabeling invalidates their entire attempt to connect in that moment.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, suddenly you see why this is all about power.
It's entirely about power. When the academy or, the clinical establishment gets to be the one to decide what counts as a credible explanation for human behavior, that power is just immense.
They get to define reality.
We get to find reality for other people.
So wait, how does that actually manifest? Is it just a policy document somewhere? Or is it more active than that?
Oh, it's often a very active dismissal just dressed up as scientific rigor. The source points out that these institutional gatekeepers will often just flat out assert that GLP is not a thing at all.
Wow.
Yeah, they'll call it a misunderstanding, a mislabeling, or a fiction. And that insistence, that's the real source of the harm. They're not saying, the theory needs more work. They're saying, Your child's reality is imaginary.
And that total lack of institutional humility just creates this self-fulfilling prophecy of neglect down the line. But the key here, the really crucial part of the analysis, is tracing where that denial goes. It doesn't just stay in a journal.
No.
The source says it moves quietly. It filters down into every single place where a person is supposed to get support.
That's right. The critique is brilliant at tracking this. It shows how the denial seeps into public school classrooms.
It dictates what goes into an IEP, an individualized education program.
It informs clinical notes, diagnoses, and this one is critical. It determines how we respond to a crisis, the whole behavioral plan.
So imagine you're a teacher or a clinician, and you get it. You see the Gestalt processing happening.
But your supervisor or your district's policy, which is driven by that top-down institutional denial, says GLP is fiction.
You're handcuffed.
You are completely handcuffed.
And this is where it gets really specific, because the source says this creates 3 restrictive outcomes for the adults who are trying to help.
It's what they can see, what they can name, and what they can believe.
Let's start with that first one. The dismissal shapes what adults are permitted to notice. How does that work? How does it make someone blind?
Okay, so let's use a common example.
Yeah.
A child gets overwhelmed in a classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of, say, yelling, they start scripting. They repeat a line from a movie. Stay golden, pony boy.
Right.
Through a GLP lens, a supporter might notice that script is a gestalt. It means something. Maybe it signifies, I'm in deep distress, or I need to get back to a calm place.
Wow.
It's communication. But if the institution denies GLP, that supporter is not permitted to notice that meaning. They're forced, by their training, by the paperwork, to just see it as echolalia, as meaningless.
Their ability to see the meaning is professionally revoked.
Revoked, that's the word. It's chilling.
And of course, if you can't notice it, you can't name it correctly, which is the second restriction, limiting what adults are allowed to name.
Precisely. So that supporter sees, stay golden, pony boy, and they know in their gut it's an urgent communication. But the system forces them to call it stereotypy or attention-seeking.
And if they try to write needs GLP-informed support on an IEP,
the district can just reject it. They can say that's not a real methodology. It doesn't exist.
Which leads directly to the third point. This restrictive labeling dictates which explanations for that child's distress are considered credible.
Yes.
If the only credible explanations are behavioral, he's trying to avoid work, he needs to be redirected, then the response is always going to be behavioral.
Punitive, even.
Yeah.
And you're completely missing the root cause. The root cause might be profound dysregulation, or that the child just can't access their word-by-word language in that moment of stress.
You mentioned trauma and Gestalt memory. This seems critical there.
Absolutely. In a crisis, people often regress to their most foundational communication patterns. For a Gestalt processor, that's those whole scripts. So if the only credible explanation for that crisis excludes the possibility that those scripts are functional communication tied to trauma or fear, the support will always fail.
And you end up with a behavior plan designed to extinguish the very communication the person is using to cry for help.
And that right there is the definition of quiet ethical violence.
Right.
Using institutional power to inflict harm by denying someone's reality.
So what does this all mean when you put it all together? I mean, the core insight here from Hoerricks seems to be that these debates over scientific merit are never just intellectual.
Never. Not when they're about people.
They're acts of power. They create the actual landscape that decides who gets support and whose entire lived experience is just dismissed as, what, a fiction?
You have to see that the main argument here is that this is a structural problem. It's about power and institutional inertia. It's not just a scholarly debate that needs a few more papers to get resolved.
Right.
The author shows that the real conflict isn't about weak data. It's about the refusal of these dominant institutions to accept that other ways of making meaning exist at all.
That refusal is the engine of the harm.
That's it. The refusal to acknowledge reality.
It's a profound thought. It forces you to look at how we define legitimacy everywhere. I mean, if your way of being in the world isn't seen as real by the system that's supposed to help you, then the system itself becomes the barrier.
It becomes a source of the violence.
Well, thank you for sharing these incredibly insightful sources for this deep dive.
Of course.
We'll leave you with this final thought based on Hoerricks' framing. If an academic debate is actually a hidden question of power and who gets to control resources, what other seemingly theoretical debates in our society might really be rooted in that same insistence, that a particular way of seeing the world simply does not exist. It really makes you wonder how often the idea of scientific neutrality is used, quietly, to draw an ethical boundary line that impacts real human lives. Something to reflect on long after this deep dive ends.